It's 2024 and KTM just came out with the 4th generation of my favorite motorcycle, the Super Duke, which is really exciting. And it's also kind of a bummer because if you're like me and you have a Gen 3, well, maybe you feel like your bike now suddenly got old, outdated. Nothing new about it. We all know everything there is to know about a Gen 3 Super Duke. Well, I'm here to tell you, we don't know everything there is to know about a Gen 3 Super Duke. The whole world of setup for the Gen 3 Super Duke and the Gen 4, to tell you the truth, it's the same bike chassis-wise, just changed. Everything that we've learned over the last few years about swing arm angles and sport links and super links and reducing the trail and gearing, everything that we've done to make this bike better than it came to us stock, just got improved upon again. And I'm gonna tell you all about it in a 6-part video series, because there's way too much stuff to cover in just one video. So there's gonna be 6 parts. The first installment, we're gonna talk about the front end right now. I'm Gogo, this is superduke.com, and let's get into it. One of the interesting things about racing a motorcycle is you get to push that motorcycle to places that you really can't access on the street. Even like mountain roads, remote mountain roads, and you're going as fast as you can, you're not going as fast as you could on a racetrack. Lap after lap, you just get faster and faster, and you really hone in on what the bike is capable of doing at this part of the track, at that part of the track. And it's really brilliant. And what's very special about it is you get to feel after a while of pushing the bike to these limits, how it reacts and the things that it does well and the things that it doesn't do well. And as you all know already, I've discovered a couple of things where this Super Duke, the Gen 3 and the Gen 4, struggles a little bit. And I've talked about this a million times. One of the things is it squats, and another thing is it has so much trail, right? Those two basic Achilles heels, right? How do you have 2 Achilles heels, but the bike does? Coincidentally and fortunately, you can kind of address both of those Achilles heels by doing one thing. You can't get it perfectly, but you can definitely improve both ends at the same time by raising the rear ride height, right? So when we lift, the tire is connected to the ground, right? This tire is on the ground, it's not going anywhere. So when you raise the rear of the bike, you don't raise the whole thing, you're kind of raising it like this. So you're extending the swing arm down and lifting the seat up. That's raising the rear. So when you do that, look at my arm. See, here's the swing arm. So if you were to raise the rear, you see how the swing arm, more of an angle? So that's great. You get more of an angle and you get more of something called anti-squat, and now the bike accelerates out of a turn better, and it doesn't sag, and the trail doesn't go extending like this. So that's one of the things that we've done with sport links and super links and shock links and gearing changes. We focused on raising the rear, because at the time, in the beginning, first couple of years, racing the Gen 3, that's all you really could do. We didn't really have an option to adjust trail, for instance, any other way than with the rear ride height. So I eventually got this bike set up to where I was racing it at 38 millimeters higher than the way the bike comes stock. That is like 3/4 of a mile higher than the bike comes stock, because what I was trying to do is get the numbers and the feel to be similar as I could, to what I had on the Gen 2, which was brilliant. And that bike measured, and you've seen that series already probably, had 101 millimeters of trail. That's where I felt like that bike was the best. And the best is kind of an interesting subject, because is it really the best, or is it just that the best that we've experienced it yet? And what I'm learning now and starting to appreciate is the latter is more true. Like, you could say, this is the best setup, this bike is amazing. But it's only because you don't know that right around the corner, if you just made this other little change, it could be even better, right? So this is what I've spent the entire winter going through numbers and considering data and anti-squats and changing things. And this is how I've come to these new rules of setup. And one of the things that I've arrived at, which kind of has bothered me quietly and secretly for over a year, is so much rear ride height, right? So much swing arm angle to get the front trail better. And yeah, the swing arm angle is better in the rear. And okay, we're getting less trail. This is wonderful. Keep going, keep going, keep going. There is a downside. There's more than one downside. There's like two measurable downsides, okay? Anti-squat is good. So anti-squat is a weird word, but the more swing arm angle this bike has, the more anti-squat it generates. And that means when you accelerate, the bike has less of a tendency to squat down. So it's anti-squat, right? So the more anti-squat you have, the harder you accelerate, the more the bike actually lifts in the rear. It pushes the tire down and you go forward and you don't sag so much on your ass, okay? But the downside of that is too much anti-squat. So you can be accelerating out of a turn and like up over a rise and you're on the gas and when you snap out of the gas, when you snap out of it and now you're on the brakes, well, you were driving so hard down that little short chute and the anti-squat was pushing so hard that your suspension, your swing arm was fully extended. Now when you crack off the gas, the bike shifts, like let's say, you get off the gas and you touch the brakes. So now the front goes down, right? So you want the swing arm to extend a little bit to help keep the rear tire on the ground. But the swing arm was already extended all the way because you were accelerating with so much anti-squat. So now when you crack in the brakes, whoop, the back of the bike lifts off the ground a little bit. So that's not ideal, right? It's not the greatest thing. You want to be able to have your suspension follow the pavement when the pavement goes up and when the pavement goes down. And too much anti-squat means you can't follow it back down. And either way, when you lose contact with the pavement, the traction, now you're going to start swimming a little bit, which is upsetting. It's fun also, but it can be upsetting. So that's one reason that too much anti-squat isn't really so great. The other reason is height, right? So rear ride height. Not just because maybe your legs aren't that long, so like your tippy toes, that is a concern, right? And I don't want to leave people with shorter legs out of the equation. Like they need to have a bike that's set up well too. But it's not just for touching the ground, but it's also for confidence, right? So this might say, why are you talking about confidence? Well, hear me out. If you try this at home, right? This is actually a interesting experiment. If you try this at home, stand on 1 foot, right? Like I'm standing on 2 feet right now. My feet are wide like this and I'm strong. I know exactly where I am in the world as far as balance goes, right? But stand on 1 foot and right away, and I haven't even been drinking. I don't even drink. Right away, you see me correcting like this, like, do it yourself. You'll be the same. Unless you're like, I don't know, some special yoga person, you're going to be a little bit uneasy. So you're using the tools that your body has for balance, right? The fluid in your ears and the hairs that will change like this, your vision, like all these tools, these natural tools in your body that you have for balance to understand where you are and to keep yourself where you are. When you start to go this way a little bit, you feel yourself a little bit off, you understand that input, you react to it, and then you make a physical change. So there's all these processes, many steps to keeping yourself balanced. But watch this. I'm standing here on balance, right? Watch this. If I just take my finger and put it on that brake lever, I'm barely touching the brake lever. But now look at me. What happened? How come I'm not like doing this? Like I wasn't making it up. Like I'm standing on 1 foot and you can see like I always have to be correcting, but if I just touch that lever, look, I'm steady. So I use this discovery in my own riding to always try to put my knee on the ground. We always, oh, we have knee pucks and they're scraped up and this is wonderful, right? And it feels exciting to touch your knee in the ground. Well, once you get beyond that, sometimes track days and things, you might find that you ride a little bit lazy. Like you'll do a lot of laps at a circuit and maybe the next month or the next year or something, you get a little lazy sometimes, like you lose touch a little bit. And what's happening is, or maybe as you're getting older, you're not as flexible, things will change. If you're not as flexible, you're not moving to the side of the bike as much, you're not getting your knee in contact with the pavement. When you don't have that contact right there, you lose confidence because now you have to rely on all these steps. You're balancing still, right? And now you're balancing G-forces and throttle input and traction, and you're feeling all of these things. And what do you have to know when your front tire starts to lose traction? We're always worried about the front tire going through a fast turn, like, oh, am I gonna lose it? Am I not gonna lose it? Like, whoa. So you're feeling like this. And what happens is when you do lose front grip, you start to fall a little bit, right? You start to fall down a little bit. Also, the G-forces that you feel pushing on you like this because you're fighting G-forces to turn, all of a sudden they get softer. So because you're not turning as much, now you're starting to slide away. So you have the G-force to react to and to feel. You have the gravity like dropping to feel. Now, when you experience these things, now you have to think about, okay, how do I correct this? And then you make a decision. Well, how about if I like ease off on the bars a little bit? Or how about if I take my knee and push it against the ground? Or how about if I straighten the bars and I'll take some of the turn away, straighten the bars, and it'll come back. And okay, so you make these decisions and you make these changes, and maybe you get the grip back. And then hopefully you can get it turned again before you're off the road. See how many steps there is to that? But if your knee is on the ground, firmly on the ground, like this, you don't have to learn this from Kenny Roberts, from Valentino Rossi, from Marc Marquez. You don't have to learn this from anybody. Look, it just happens. It just happens. So when you're riding, if your knee is on the ground and you start to lose the front traction, instantly the ground pushes against your knee. You don't start to fall like this. I mean, you do start to fall like this, but what you'll feel is the pavement pushing against your knee. And like your knee was out like this, now all of a sudden it goes like this. Instantly, without training, without special riding, anything, you will push off. You will just push naturally off. And that's this quickly it happens. You don't even think about it. There aren't 4 steps of feeling it and making a change and all this stuff. It's just, bam, you push back and you're already in a better position. So that's like physically what happens when you lose traction and why it's good to have your knee on the ground. But there's another part to this. How about in your head? So much of riding a motorcycle is about your confidence. It's about your head, your mind, how you feel about how the bike is going through a turn. And when you feel good, you ride good. So when you're in a turn and your knee is on the ground and you feel confident, you enjoy your motorcycle more, you ride safer, you ride better. Everything is more positive. There's nothing more negative except for the fact that, well, my last race on Sunday, brand new knee puck in the morning, no knee puck at the end of the day. Destroyed through the knee puck, through the Velcro on my leathers. Like, it happens, right? That's the only downside. Everything else is positive. So why am I talking about knee pucks when I'm talking about setting up the motorcycle? Because of ride height, right? The more ride height you have in the rear, I found, and I'm tall, I'm like almost 6'3". So the more ride height you have in the rear, the farther you are away from the ground, which means the less contact you have, that I have had. for all this time racing this bike, I still get my knee down and I still drag my knee, but sometimes I notice in photographs, sometimes my knee's like this far off the pavement, which means I don't have this anymore. And I don't like that. I don't enjoy that. I already get off the bike pretty far. I'm sure, you know, Jorge Martin would get off the bike farther, right? All those guys would get off the bike farther. I'm older than shit. Maybe I'm not as flexible, whatever, a million reasons, but I ride pretty good. And maybe I wasn't always in touch with the ground. And I feel my confidence goes down like this. So I spent the winter pontificating. It's a great word. I don't even know if it's the right for this use, but trying to figure out a way to get the Gen 3 and the Gen 4, which I don't have yet, to work as well getting out of a turn and work as well with the trail that I like to have without going 38 millimeters higher in the rear. So, I arrived at some things. First of all, the super clamp. I've had this super clamp, adjustable offset triple clamps for 2 years I've been developing them. But the thing is, the several versions that I used and tested and developed were not as good as finally this winter came out with the retail version. And quite a few of you in the world all over, Australia and Spain and the UK and Canada, America, like quite a few have sold to people. So I'm not the only one experiencing this new version. The new version is more adjustable. My prototypes only could do like 2 millimeters more offset, like I call it plus 2, plus 3, plus 4. What that means is you're adding offset. You're making the distance from the steering stem to the center of your forks farther, which is reducing your trail. And the plus, also you can think of the plus as like plus performance, right? It's more performance. It's a quicker steering. It's a more confident feeling. Easier to throw side to side. It's great. Higher roll speeds, all these things. So for 2 years, I really could only use like plus 2. So I still used a lot of rear ride height. This year is the first year, 2.5 weeks ago, is the first race weekend that I could actually race on the triple clamp that I've been selling for months now. And I did a courageous thing. I have a customer who immediately put them on and immediately went to 98 millimeters of trail. And I thought, holy shit, dude, you're out of your mind. I can't even tell you how that works. I haven't even run it there. The farthest I've ever gone is 101 millimeters of trail. Because again, that's what I understood. Like that's what I understood was the best the bike could be. I never was able to try 100, 99, 98, and now I have. And let me tell you something. I have some footage that I will share from a battle that I had, a last lap battle with Steve Metz on a Panigale 1199, whatever the hell it is. The last World Superbike Spec twin cylinder, and his bike is pretty wild to even just look at. Amazing. I think his forks cost more than my whole race program. But I had a battle with him. 5 times we changed the lead in 1 lap, on the last lap, 5 times. I was having rear traction problems, old tire drama that I'll get into in another video. All my fault. But my front end, the new front end, the new triple clamps, the new offsets was so brilliant that I was able to jam this bike up inside of him, going into turns, trail braking, last second before apexes, and I had 100% traction. Not a foot did I go out of where I wanted to be. Bar to bar, my left bar to his right bar, never touched him. And it was epic. So what was great was it's not just the trail, right? Yes, the Super Clamp allowed me to get, I used a +4 insert, right? And it allowed me to get much less trail than I would have had otherwise. But the other thing is the triple clamps are stout. Like, they really hold the forks straight. On other triple clamps that I've used, when I was trail braking really hard and really deep into a turn, think about all your weight, all the motorcycle's weight, as you're like plowing into a turn and everything's relying on that front tire and you're turning in, those forks are going like this. They're bending. The triple clamps are twisting, like they're actually rolling like this. So the forks go like this. So you lose feel. For every little bit that they twist and bend is less data that you have, less accurate data that you have. You think the forks are here because that's where your bars are, but the tire is actually pointed that way, right? And then it flexes back, and now your bars are here and the tire is there. Then your bars are here and the tire is there. So eliminating all that and knowing exactly where it was. If the tire started to turn in a little bit, my bars turned in. Instead of the triple clamps flexing, my bar stays straight and the tire's going like this under all this force. When the tire moved, my bars moved. And I knew exactly what was happening. I knew just when to let go of the brake a little bit, just when I could tug a little bit more to avoid his bike and going in. It was epic. So that's huge difference with the Super Clamp. Finally, I can use the same Super Clamp that you can use, and I was able to push the bounds. So in the introduction, I said, like, we understood this, and we understood this, and we made this better, and now, like this? Well, that's one of the measurable differences where I brought the bike to a new place, and it was better. There's another thing I did. About the front end, which this is the only bike in the world that has it. The only Super Duke in the world that has Öhlins FKR cartridges in the forks, in the KTM WP forks. And I'm going to tell you about that next. Öhlins suspension, in my opinion, is very highly regarded. I've used them on lots of different bikes and had great success. So I really wanted to use Öhlins suspension on the Super Duke, but couldn't really, right? Because, well, you can't even get a shock. The Öhlins doesn't make a shock that fits this bike. Another company called, I think it's called Andriani. That's a good, they have cool products. They make suspension parts. They pieced together an Öhlins TTX shock that fits the Super Duke. It's height adjustable and it's got a range. And this is an interesting point because there's like 4 or 5 different shocks you can buy that will fit a Super Duke, but they all have different lengths. And the length of the shock on a Super Duke, on any Super Duke, is pretty huge. It has a really big effect on the attitude of the bike, swing arm angles and things like we talked about before. So really important. And I will get into talking about it. But for now, let's just say that I didn't love the length, adjustability, the range that the Andriani shock came in. So I used a TTX shock from a BMW. The only difference is, like, my reservoir is higher up, so I had to actually take my voltage regulator and relocate it under the tail. And then that's my shock. So I use a different adjustment range than most other Öhlins shocks, and I really like it. I love it, actually. But what about the forks? Forks, like, what do we have available for cartridges? Andriani also makes cartridges for the forks. I don't think they really, I've seen them. My buddy Gavin bought them, and he didn't use them, he sold them. They're like a very affordable, good street cartridges. I don't think they're really full race cartridges. They don't seem to have the damping available. Fine for the street, I'm sure. WP, the Apex Pro cartridges. There's cartridges you can get for these forks. I mean, they're made by the same company that makes the forks. So obviously they fit, and I'm sure they work. They make the forks 12 millimeters longer than the OEM forks. And if you do a little math, figure in your head, when you make the forks longer, right, that extends the forks out a little bit. So you gain trail, which is, if you install the forks to the same height that they were before, put the cartridges in, now you're gaining trail, which is, we don't want to go that way. You might, but I don't want to go that way. I want to go the other way. I want to lose trail. So if you do use the Apex Pro cartridges, make sure you mount the forks. Make sure you're conscious of where you mount the forks. I would slide them up. If they're 12 millimeters, I would slide them up 12 millimeters to put the forks back to where they were. But that's me. You make your own decisions about that stuff. So anyway, that's the cartridges too. That's the second option. I used to use GP suspension cartridges. They're made in Oxnard, California, and they were really good. They seem to be changing some things about their ideas about how their cartridges work and the lengths that they want to use. And I tried to work with them a lot last year. I actually sent my forks to them 6 times. Once I even drove there in person and said, I want them to be this long. And they just wouldn't make them that long. So I got kind of frustrated, and I don't use GP cartridges anymore, which meant I went into this winter, I don't have cartridges. Like, I didn't want to use the Apex Pros because of the length. I wanted something better than the Andriani's, and I couldn't use GPs anymore. So, you know, I don't give up very easily. Back to BMW, back to Öhlins and BMWs, and let's figure out which cartridges fit these forks. And my friend Fuzzy, also in Southern California, he did a bunch of research, and he found that Öhlins does make cartridges for a BMW that's very similar to the design of these WP forks. It's kind of unique how these forks go together and come apart. It's actually conveniently unique because the cartridges on these forks are held in place with a bolt that comes up through the bottom. So you want to take your cartridges out, you just undo the bolt, pour the oil out, and here's your cartridge. It's great. So there is a BMW S1000, I don't know what year it is, Fuzzy figured all that stuff out, that the length works pretty close, right? And the way it mounts pretty much works. I had to machine a different bolt so it fits in there because it's a different thread pitch that the our bolt is to bolt into the Öhlins cartridge. It's a different thread pattern. So I had to make a bolt that's proper for that. And it wasn't a standard bolt. It's a special bolt. And then we had to figure out spacers to get the length and the strokes right. And the last thing, the trickiest thing, was the fork caps. The forks for the BMW are wider than our WP forks by like a millimeter. So unfortunately, you couldn't just take the cartridge, put it in, bolt it from the bottom, and screw the cap in. And the cap has all the adjusters, and a fork cap is pretty complicated. Like, there's preload adjuster mechanisms, mechanical mechanisms. There's the clickers, the compression, and the rebound. There's a lot of stuff that goes on inside of a fork cap. So this is really unfortunate because Öhlins doesn't have a fork cap that fits our WP forks. So project kind of stopped, but didn't really stop. It just kind of slowed down a little bit. I called my buddy Ed Lloyd, who's a machinist in Milpitas, California. And together, we came up with a design to make the outer part of the Öhlins cap, a new outer portion of that cap. So when you get the cartridges, you take off the cap and you just unscrew all the inners of the cap, all the clickers and the preload adjusters, just unscrew them from it and screw them in to this cap that we have here, this outer part of the cap. And then just bolt them in. And there you go. Same preload adjuster, works exactly the same. Same clickers, everything works exactly the same. So Öhlins has 2 different design cartridges that you can use. Oil bath cartridge, which is like standard. That's what most of fork cartridges are, meaning the fork is filled with oil to whatever, somewhere around here. And all the dampening and valving is all submerged in oil inside of the fork. So when the fork is compressed and extends, the oil is forced through this valving, and that's how our forks work. We did a little video, me and Gavin, about how forks work. You can see it in my library of videos. But that's a standard oil bath cartridge, right? They also make something called an FKR cartridge. I don't really know what that stands for, but there's no oil in the fork. Instead, there's like a canister that's part of the cartridge assembly itself. And all the oil is inside of that canister. It's a smaller amount of oil, and it's pressurized. It's interesting because why do they pressurize it? Because how a fork works is there's, very simply, right? Think of like a glass filled with oil, right? And then underneath it, there's another glass filled with oil. Maybe there's a space between the two of them and a little straw connecting. So the way a fork works is, you push the oil up the first glass, it goes through the tiny straw and it fills up the other glass. And then when the oil goes down, it fills up the bottom glass. So that same oil goes from this reservoir to that reservoir, back to this reservoir, back to that reservoir, as the forks go up and down, as the wheel goes up and down. The oil just goes in and out and in and out through that tiny straw. And that tiny straw, in this case, is the valving. And when you do the clickers, you're kind of adjusting how small or how large that hole is. So how freely the forks move or how slowly they move. That's where the slow comes from, the oil being pushed through the little orifice, right? So that's a great idea. It works. That's why most forks work, right? But there's a downside to this hydraulic world, because I'm not a scientist, okay, but when you take a liquid and push it with pressure through a tiny hole, that liquid can, due to whatever hell, I don't understand, can turn into a gas. So it's not air, it's gas. So the oil that's in our forks, when we hit a bump, and the forks move like this, and all that oil gets pushed through that tiny hole, little air bubbles. Sorry, I didn't say air bubbles. I said gas bubbles. I didn't hear air. Little gas bubbles will form, right? And now when the fork wants to extend and that oil now has to go through the valving again, it's going through with gas mixed in. So it's easier. And then if you go bang, 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 now there's a lot of gas, little tiny gas bubbles that are going through the valving. And when you first had just oil, the forks felt like this. And now they have oil and gas, the forks feel like this. So it's a little bit inconsistent, right? They figure valving out to work in a gas and oil state. So it's not like they break when you get gas, when you get cavitation. That's what cavitation is called, when the oil turns to a gas. Same thing on a boat. Like if you ever were driving a little dinghy or your boat and you turn the wheel and the engine and you floor it, sometimes the propeller will spin so fast that the boat doesn't go anywhere. It just bubbles everywhere. That's cavitation. And it's like there's not even any liquid, it's just bubbles. So the FKR cartridges, with spring pressure, they pressurize the oil that's inside of this canister where the valving is. And having that pressure reduces cavitation. I don't think it eliminates it 100%, but the more pressure there is, the less the cavitation plays a role in the dampening. So what's the upside of that? I don't really know. I don't really know the science. Like, I didn't do any research about this. I was like, I asked Fuzzy, I said, which one's better? He said, the FKR cartridges are better, faster. That's what the top guys in the AMA use. I said, give me those. So I can't tell you, like, with all the wording, why they work better, but I can tell you that I just experienced what I just experienced. And between the super clamp and this new offset number, remember, we were here with the Gen 3 Super Duke setup, which is also the Gen 4 Super Duke setup, and then I thought outside the box. I got the super clamp at a new offset and the FKR Öhlins cartridges. And this new jump in level got me to be able to do things with the front end of this motorcycle. And to be honest with you, any motorcycle I've ever raced, I don't remember ever doing things with the front end, having the confidence that I had on the brakes, trail braking, going over bumps and inconsistency, like understanding what my feel was for traction was fucking brilliant. So those are two main points about the front end, which are like new world stuff. Like, I didn't know about this stuff. I kind of took some risks and thinking outside the box to get there, and it was successful. And I'm really excited about it. And if you want, I didn't even pay to make several of these caps. I'm not a suspension guy. I don't want to get into the business of buying and selling cartridges because, whew, that's like suspension people only should mess with that stuff. Because customers will say, well, what valving? What can I change? If I was to sell that stuff, oh my God, now I got to sort of different valving, ordering things. I don't want anything to do with it. It's not my field. I just made the caps because I wanted the Öhlins cartridges. So if you also want Öhlins cartridges, email me off superduked.com. There's a contact page there, and I will help you get a set of these caps. I'm really here to spread the love of Super Dukes and KTMs, and we're all better if we share things. And I'm all over sharing stuff. So contact me, and I'll help you get this worked out. I'll put you in contact with Fuzzy even, or maybe you get cartridges yourself. There are some specific things that we did to the spacers, because cartridges can be manipulated to have different travel ranges, to have different lengths, which are two different things. Stroke and length are different things. So we wrote down exactly what we did, the size of the spacers and things, and I'm fine sharing that with you if you're interested. That's that. There's one more thing. I know I said just two things about the front end, but there's one more thing about the front end. When I designed the super clamp, there was 12 iterations of the design. I don't even know if that's the right word, sorry. There was 12 versions of the design, and each one, 11, 9, 10, 11, 12, each one was an improvement. I raced on like 4, 5, but then all these other ones were like subtle changes. And one of the subtle changes that I made, one of the last ones, was the bar riser mount. As you know, with a stock triple clamp, there's two mounting holes where the bar riser comes up and holds the bars. I don't know if you know this or not, but those bar risers are, let's say the bolts in the center, they're offset. They hold the bars a little bit forward of the hole. Or if you turn the bar riser around, they hold the bar a little farther than the hole. So if the mounting hole for your triple clamp is right here, the bar actually will be there or there, right? So that one hole in the triple clamp gives you two mounting positions. And on the OEM triple clamp for the Super Duke, there's two holes. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 places. Also on the Power Parts triple clamp, there's two holes, same two holes, in the same place. So 1, 2, 3, 4. On the super clamp, I made there be 3 holes. because we have the ability to have 7 different offset positions. So I wanted you to be able to move the bars in different places too. So now we can go forward of the farthest forward hole, which is farther forward than OEM, and then back of that, and then forward of the middle hole, and then back of that, and then forward of the rear hole and back of that. So the front hole is farther forward, the rear hole is farther backward than the OEMs. And so now we have 2, 4, 6 different positions of where the bars can be. And, you know, okay, on paper that sounds like, wow, there's more positions, wonderful. And maybe they're in a better place. Okay, wonderful. What does that really mean? Remember, here's where the bike was, here's where the bike is. What it meant for me is I put the bar risers in the farthest forward position and turned them so the bars were the farthest forward from that. So I'm as far forward as possible because again, I'm almost 6'3", right? I'm kind of a bigger guy. And I like to put my weight forward driving out of turns. Like I've said in another video, I step on the exhaust sometimes and burn the heel off my boot because I'm trying to get myself more forward. And so the bars help put my weight a little more forward, which also kind of frees up my body. Like I feel a little cramped before, and now I feel a little bit freer, a little bit easier to move. And when I'm leaned over in full turning position, my shoulders down, my knees out, my ass is off the seat, and I'm like this. See where my hands are, like this angle of my wrist? To be honest, the angle of these bars is not the most best comfortable for me. And I know other people have changed their bars too. I sometimes wish that the angle was a little different. I've even thought about bending bars and all this stuff, maybe getting different ones. I have used different ones on Gen 2, I use different bars. But on the Gen 3, I use the stock bars, believe it or not. But moving them more forward, I found that while I was in my riding position, my wrist wasn't as bent like this. It wasn't as uncomfortable. It was a little bit freer. I felt like a little bit freer with my hands and the way the bars flowed in my hands. It was a little more natural. So, wow. The super clamps allowed me to reduce my rear height, which got my knee on the ground better. The bars, the super clamp bars being more forward, allowed my wrist to open a little bit better. The forks staying in a line like this gave me more confidence and more feel, trail braking and going in. The offset meant I could flick the bike back and forth, and I didn't have to make it flickable by jacking the rear up so high. I'm still 20 millimeters higher than stock, right? But I'm not to the moon anymore, which on another point I didn't even talk about is beneficial also because the higher you sit on the bike, you know, the higher your center of gravity is. And when you accelerate, the higher that is, the more of a tendency you're gonna have to squat, right? So yeah, sure, making the swing arm angle steeper creates more anti-squat, right? But it also creates more of a condition where you're going to experience, you're going to generate more squatting force. So yeah, on paper, yeah, way more anti-squat, but you also created more potential squatting. So from my experience, yes, increasing the swing arm angle was more powerful than the negative that you experienced by raising your height so much, but it's still a thing, right? I want to be lower. I do want more swing arm angle, but I want to be lower. So there's so much more stuff to talk about. I can't believe it. I have a chalkboard next to me with like 6 new things, and I just talked about 2 of them, which in a way turned into 4 of them. but those other two aren't even on the list. There's so much stuff. I'm like exploding with enthusiasm here. I'm sorry about that. So if you like this video, if you learned something from this video, if you want more videos, do a like and a subscribe thing, and I promise you, I'll get you more good stuff. There's more stuff coming. I'm Gogo for SuperDuke.com. Stay safe. Love your bike.